We are live, presumably. There we go. We actually exist now. Howdy all. So skip forward 10 minutes and I will officially start. If you're just now catching this on YouTube. And right at 6 p.m. That's in 8 minutes. And so hang out, say hey, post a question, whatever works for you. And I will start babbling incoherently here any second now. I was about to type something else. I don't know what it was. Oh well. All right. Welcome, whoever's in there. I know I see somebody else on there. So we will get started here in just a bit. I'm Bob Lindy from Traditional School of Herbal Studies, Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies. I hope make sure we got a couple questions. I think we got just about all the questions from last week. So if you're just jumping on, I'm going to start in 7 minutes, right at 6, with intro and all of that good stuff. If you're just catching us after the recording on YouTube, you can fast forward 7 more minutes from here, or thereabouts. My own questions down here. Yep, I lost somebody on there. Oh, Turkey Day. And if you don't know, you can get the full recording on our YouTube channel. And there we go. We're going to cover everything that we can in 2 hours or less here. And we're going to get started right at 6. So that's in 6 minutes if you're just joining us. I see somebody jumped on. Feel free to post any questions as they pop into your head. I will do my very best to monitor the chat because I'm here. Right, I gotta keep up with my text messages, all the things at the same time. Oh, we got a gang on here, so let us know who you are, where you're from. Post your questions on here. We'll get started in just 5 minutes. And got a couple of questions, a really interesting one that I could just babble on for days about. So, something about menopause, perimenopausal stuff, and some possible substitutes. And I've got some other things, and we've got a ton of events coming up here at Traditions in the next, next month, I guess. So I will try to give a brief synopsis on some that you won't even find on our calendar necessarily, because we've got some really cool outside folks coming in the not so distant. Hey, Maddie! Yay! Glad you're able to join us. And we'll get started here in just 4 minutes. And if you're catching us on YouTube after the fact, fast forward 4 minutes. A couple of people hiding in the background. And pardon my sleepiness. Hey, Owen. Uh-oh. Let me make sure I'm still on my... I went ahead and... good. I am not on this evening. Let me try going on. Get off of that and we'll go on the regular 5G stuff. See how that does. There'll be a little blip here and then we'll see how we do. All right. Hopefully that's a little better. If not, let me know. That may be the best we get. It does seem like it is up to the internet gods as to what kind of connection we're going to get on any given night out here. So, somewhat of a pain. I may have to try something other than Facebook in the future. I know I threatened that before, never got around to it. And I don't know whether Zoom or any of the others will do a better job. So hopefully this is doing a little better and not cutting in and out. Okay. Let's see. I brought my pen and paper because I know I'm going to forget everything once I start babbling. Geographic. Yeah. Write your questions now so I can, because I got 2 minutes. All right, cool. I'm glad it's doing a little better. You just never know which one of the connections is going to work best. And I do apologize. I'm here by myself this evening, so I'm going to do my very best to keep up with the chat there. And I'm going to have a spare piece of paper because I know sometimes it can get hopping on there. We'll get started here in just 2 minutes. Okay, 1 minute. Well, and I'm going to guess for all of you who aren't here in Florida, it's cold wherever you are. Well, I don't know. I think you're from South America, so it might be lovely there. But we're about to get cold here. It's getting down probably below 60 tonight or tomorrow. So that's freezing here in Florida. We're a little wimpy. All right. We got to, for doing last minute of actually posting that last night on Turkey Day weekend. I'm excited anybody showed up, so I appreciate you all being here this evening. And I'm actually shocked anybody showed up. So. All right, I'm going to say it's 6 o'clock on the dot. Look at that. It just turned the clock over. If you don't know, I'm Bob Lindy from the Tradition School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida. All right, cloudy and the sun's go down, but nonetheless, St. Pete rocks. If you didn't know it, we have both a Western and a Chinese herbal program, as well as lots of cool standalone classes. You can find out more at traditionsherbschool.com, or for the clinical practice or to see somebody in our student clinic, you can find out more there at acuherbals.com. And sorry, I'm going to write down some questions. Okay. Okay, cool. And we've got a bunch of classes coming up. We've already started the Chinese program, so sorry, you're too late if you want to get into the Chinese program. It was full anyway, so really excited that we've got a great group of students here that seem like a sharp crowd. So I'm looking forward to the next 2 years with this awesome group that just started. And the Western program, we're actually got a couple of Western Herbal 101s that are coming up, one this weekend, and a couple, I think we got one more before the new year, and one more in the start of the next year. So if you're interested in the Western program, or you just want to learn a little bit more about some of our local herbs or basic herbal medicine making, and our running joke for 101 is 30 herbs you can't kill anybody with. But still do some darn good medicine. And we've also we're restarting the Ayurvedic series of classes. That's starting up in January. We've got Anatomy and Physiology for the Herbalist. I think our next class is on the respiratory system. And, I'm really excited with the school down the street here from our clinical location. We've got the beautiful half-acre teaching medicinal garden there with a fire ring, as well as 2 classroom spaces. And we've started to open that up to some outside groups. And kind of in particular, we're trying to do our best to support our community as new kids start to, the new kids, I sound like an old man. The new folks start to come and starting to create their businesses and educational systems and so forth. So I know we've got 2 people who are starting a women's circle with kind of slightly different, or actually dramatically different approaches. And we don't have that information up yet. And Kara, one of our graduates, has had some great success doing a cacao ceremony there. So I'm really excited to see her blossoming with her practice, both in spiritual classes as well as an herbalist. And she has a cacao ceremony class coming up on the December 3rd, and you need to reach out to her directly. So we're not handling registration for outside groups like that. And our own Renee Prince is got Winter Solstice coming up on the 16th of December. And I think that's all the exciting stuff. You can find more on our website. There's a bunch of good stuff coming up in January. Our calendar is jam-packed. And so if you don't know it, we've been trying to do this open forum the last Friday of every month. Kind of started it because of COVID. And I appreciate, we always get a few new faces and a lot of old faces. And for the folks who can't show up, I love that we're able to upload this onto YouTube so that you can listen to it 3 or 4 more times, because I do tend to talk a little fast. And for a lot of you, this may be very new information. So know that you can find it on YouTube, Tradition School of Herbal Studies. Be sure to subscribe to the Tradition School. And you can catch all the new recordings coming up. And I'm happy to say I'm actually taking a little bit of vacation time and the holidays coming up. And of course, I say I'm going to take vacation. I hope to make a bunch of videos so we can start to upload some more educational videos onto the YouTube channel. I have been negligent of it of late with that. So let's jump right into it. So, and if you haven't said hey yet, be sure to say hi, where you're from, and type in any questions if you've got any. We've got a couple, and I'm sure I will be able to keep us busy talking endlessly if need be. So we had an interesting question. Somebody had heard from another excellent herbalist, Kat Meyer, was talking about perimenopause and menopause and some of the approaches to that. And, as herbalists, it's one of those things that we see a lot of, both in trying to make that normal transition in life as comfortable as possible. And I always say menopause isn't something that's a disease that needs to be treated. If a person is in balance, as close as any of us, Texas, what are you doing in Texas, Rick? Menopause is normal and not a disease. And if somebody is in generally good health, it's one of those things that should be fairly unnoticeable, except for the loss of menses. But there are things that tend to aggravate a group of symptoms, both when perimenopause, where your cycle tends to become less frequent to unpredictable or erratic. And movement into menopause where there hasn't been a cycle in over 1 year. So that's kind of what we look at. From a Western medical standpoint, they look at the decline of estrogen. And oddly enough, there is a mix of beliefs as to what's actually going on because of our estrogenic environment, for lack of a better name, everything from the hormones in our milk and our foods and the xenoestrogens, those things that are kind of those toxic estrogens in everything from our clothes to our furniture. I'm finding an increasing amount of people who have an excess of estrogen and varying high or low of progesterone. And so that tends to, and sometimes testosterone as well. And so that oftentimes throws a monkey wrench into successful transition into menopause. So they were saying that there's a number of herbs that, if you go out there and Google herbs for menopause, a million herbs show up, some of which are effective, some are very mediocre. Within Chinese medicine, we have a couple of formulas that we tend to have success with. And one of the things that's always interesting is, I always say it has a lot to do with behaviors. And so certain foods can aggravate or help with menopausal symptoms like night sweats and hot flashes. And don't let me forget to talk about vaginal dryness, which is probably one of the more challenging aspects that is, again, fairly normal, but can be a real challenge to deal with. So we generally, when we look at the energetics of menopause, we generally think of deficiency. So it's as we age, things decline as a whole. And so generally that thought of deficiency, and it's a lack of the cooling, nourishing fluids of the body. And that's not necessarily water. We think of, from that Chinese perspective, the elements of yin become an issue. And so a nice, easy translation of what is yin. It's cooling, moistening stuff. And so that can be blood, that can be water, that can be interstitial fluids. Those are usually things that are fairly palpable. The skin gets drier, the secretions get drier, and that we see these flare-ups of heat primarily in the evening, but they can happen any time of the day. So when we think about foods in relationship to menopause, things that are heating are generally not your friend. And sorry, alcohol tends to aggravate menopause symptoms, and in particular night sweats. And so even though you can enjoy a glass of wine while you're in that perimenopausal, early menopausal stage, you may find it is aggravating to your hot flashes and night sweats to drink any amount of alcohol. Oh, it's a good time to start to move away from that, or at least limiting it to special occasions. And then we can find certain foods are helpful. If you really want to go into the extreme, there's things like jellyfish that are oftentimes helpful in cooling and moistening. We see its effect on beauty. It's thought to be very nourishing to the skin and nourishing to the energies of the kidney, if you will, because it's a sea product and salty in its flavor. There's other things that are, we generally look at cooked foods, soups and stews, bone broth, bone soup, chicken, seafood. All are very beneficial to help work towards that balance of energies as we transition into another part of our natural phases in life. And when it comes to herbs, and sorry, I'm saving the actual question to the end because I'm going to throw in all my cool Chinese stuff first. There's generally two formulas that we look in reference to that. Jur by Di oops, hard to think and type at the same time. Huang Wan and Erxian Wan. And so Zhi Di Huang Wan is 6-flavor Romania 6, some people know it as, with 2 herbs added onto it. So this is 8-flavor Romania. Zhi Di Huang Wan is the Lieu Di Huang Wan with Zhimu and Huang Bai added to it. And Erxian Wan is an interesting one. So the way we usually look at it is if somebody has a weak, rapid pulse, it might even be forceful in one area or another. They've got a red tongue, night sweats, hot flashes, malar flush, which is redness right here at the malar or cheekbones, that our hands and feet are hot, maybe even center of the chest, tending towards constipation, night sweats, and hot flashes. Then and red tongue with no coat, we would use the first formula, Zhi Di Huang Wan. If they have all of those symptoms, but they stick out their tongue and it's pale, we use the other one, Erxian Wan. And that's also known as two immortals. And basically, from the Chinese perspective, the first one, Zhi Di Huang Wan, is for yin deficiency with an excess of heat. And Erxian Wan is both the yin and yang has declined, but the yang is just a smidge more declined than the yin. And so the Erxian Wan is interesting in that it will work if you choose that one correctly, and I would say maybe 15-20% of the time that is the right formula, that pale tongue with the night sweats, hot flashes. And you give it to somebody, and within a few days, it's a miracle. It's a dramatic reduction in all those menopausal symptoms. And you sound like a really cool herbalist if you do this. If you go, anywhere from a month to 6 months, all of a sudden, all your symptoms are going to come back. And that's the time when you switch your formula. So Erxian Wan tends to work. But once the yang is more nourished than the yin, then you switch over to the first one, Zhi Di Huang Wan. Or you've got the option of, helps if I can spell, Lieu, Lieu Di Huang Wan, which is without the excess heat. So you got to play it. There's certainly other formulas, but the Zhi Di Huang Wan and Erxian Wan tends to be our heavy hitters, that those are frequently our first go-tos for stuff. There's any number of probably dozens of formulas that may be used or modifications for the unique set of symptoms that a particular person has whilst they're going through menopause. From a Western perspective, it's not that different, that we look at a whole slew of different formulas. The nice thing about the Western herbs is that a lot of times the herbs we'll choose for that are ones that we can make a tea out of. Sorry, it's past my bedtime. I spent the day, I ended up squeezing in a client that was having a really hard time. And then I had to pack for Shopapalooza. It's a big deal, 300 vendors, blah, 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 down in the Vinoy Park, downtown St. Pete. And so I had to get that all set up tonight before we did the open forum this evening. And I literally just finished that, didn't get a chance to eat anything, ran back here to get everything set up. And I think I stole somebody's protein bar out of the fridge, so hopefully I'll not get in too much trouble for that. So with the Western herbs, there's a whole slew of different things, and we'll see some of the Chinese herbs slipped in here, because we're finding, there's always been a respect for the Chinese herbal medicine in the herbal realm. But we're seeing Western herbalists start to adopt some of those herbs, and also from India, Ayurvedic. And every once in a while, they're not always given credit for it, but when we start to look at Nani Tibbs or Persian medicine, we're starting to see some of their medicines slip into this as well. And so things like Romania, which is Shudi or Shengdi is frequently, I totally blanked on the name of that. Romania is starting to show up in the Western herbal formulas for menopause. In Ayurvedic medicine, we're starting to see Shatavari show up, which is related to Tianmendong, which is the Chinese asparagus. Both of those are asparagus root. I consider those pretty much interchangeable. And then, interesting enough, and this is according to David Winston. There's a longer story to all of this, and I will do my best. One that's frequently talked about is black cohosh. And you get very mixed reviews from herbalists, from people who are taking it for their menopause symptoms, as to whether or not it works. And according to David Winston, a huge amount of our black cohosh supply is, and this is a relative term, adulterated with a Chinese black cohosh. And they don't even differentiate it by a different Latin name. It is Sheng Ma. Sorry, I'm going to try to type these in. Sheng Ma in Chinese medicine. And so we do not use that for menopause at all. But according to David, it works even better than the Western black cohosh. And it's funny, I always try to come, I'm like, no, the Chinese know stuff. So why do we get these differing reactions from it? So in Chinese herbal medicine, we use black cohosh, the Sheng Ma. We use that to vent rashes. It has an upward energy, but it is a herb that, depending on our dosage, we literally release the muscles up here and vent things out. And so if somebody were to have a little bit too much heat in their body, black cohosh would make sense to have a venting off of heat. David also talks about it. We see it has in Western herbal medicine, we use black cohosh as an antispasmodic. So muscle spasms, in particular, I always say below the belly button. And so the psoas muscle that kind of, there's some really interesting spiritual connections with the psoas. And for those of you who don't know, it's spelt funny, Psoas, iliopsoas or psoas. It connects your upper and lower parts of your body, so it connects your trunk to your pelvis and your legs. And when it's out of whack, lots of menstrual problems, irregularity, and pain. It has a link to emotional changes as well. And David talks about black cohosh specifically for menopause, not menopause, for that kind of transition as men age, their testosterone declines, and not so much as to raise their testosterone, more to deal with the dark cloud, melancholia, depression that can come with for both men and women, but is one of those herbs he specifically likes for men. So I don't usually add black cohosh into my herbal formulas for menopause, and yet it has a role. A lot of people come to me, they've already started down that Western path, and that's one that I'm like, you can stay on that, and I'll kind of do a workaround on that because it has a little bit of dispersing and drying. I tend to just make sure there's a little extra moisture to make up for that herb. It is an herb that grows throughout the Southeast, except for Florida, maybe the Panhandle. I've managed to grow it here in a pot this time of year. Actually, I just planted some about a month ago that I'm hoping comes up soon. But it tends to grow all over the Southeast in shady areas, sometimes near a stream, but it's not a requirement. Beautiful little flower stalk on it, so it is stunning, and you get just a spider web of just all these little roots tangled together. It's absolutely stunning. So there were some other herbs that Kate Meyer talked about, chickweed, motherwort. I'm looking to see if any other ones in that question. Those were the biggies, and both of those are fine. I do like motherwort. It translates, it is mother's herb. But if we look at the Latin name for that, it has to do with the heart. And when we see menopause, there is an increased risk of borderline hypertension, broken hearts. That idea of mother's herb or mother's wort, W-O-R-T, literally just means herb. It As a woman starts to enter menopause, a lot of times the kids have left the home, and so that empty nester that a mother needs to be comforted as they see a transition from the nurturing mother to sometimes grandmother, or sometimes just rediscovering who they are. And so I really like mother's wort in there. The other one that I think oftentimes is helpful is lady's mantle, and that is because life is oftentimes, for women, they are presented with unique and more challenges oftentimes than men, just because of the patriarchal society that puts unique obstacles in their way, and their role has so many different facets. That is oftentimes their mother, wife, breadwinner, and 50 other roles that they may play. The lady's mantle, that idea of creating a cloak of protection, and allows for things to be released. I like rose as well. I love the shatavari. Obviously I use the Chinese approaches very often. But one of the discussions, the specific question, let's get to the good part here, was the substitution of kudzu in lieu of black cohosh. And honestly, I've not heard of that. And there are a few similarities between those two herbs that I know of. I wouldn't consider them interchangeable. They'd probably do great together. And again, just never thought of it. Kudzu is also a Chinese herb, because everything's a Chinese herb. Just ask the Chinese. Is Ganglion, which is the root, and Gehua or Ganglion is the flower. And one of the ways, and so we use the kudzu in Chinese specifically for something that's trapped with spasms of the neck and shoulder. We can use it to guide there. The root is primarily used. And one of the things I like it for, I will add that in to people's formulas because of its high iron content. It makes an interesting potato chip. I won't say that it's yummy, but it does have if you slice it thin enough and dry it, it does have kind of a potato chip-like texture, a little grainier. The Japanese use it as a soup thickener, so you can actually grind it into a fine powder and use it as a thickening agent for puddings or potatoes, but mostly it's just ground into a powder and added to soup. And so I find it's a good addition for anemia, iron deficiency, and to kind of help. It's very fibrous, and so it's helpful for binding up the bowels as well. And we do see, as women approach that perimenopausal, menopausal, there's some very erratic menses where sometimes people have their period for weeks or months where they're bleeding that entire time from the Chinese call it flooding and trickling. So it's like it keeps, sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's a little, but it literally doesn't stop for a month or two or three. And so the potential for anemia is huge. And so I love it for that, and that binding together of stuff and that thickening of the soup, if you will, is very effective. And there's also in the flowers, the Gugenhua or Gehua, is, everybody talks about it specifically for alcohol withdrawal or addiction, but I think it's important to recognize there's also an emotional aspect to it. And I haven't seen a flower in a long time, but if I remember right, the fresh flowers have a purple tinge to them. And as a general rule, we find anything that has purple in it has a mental, emotional aspect and a spiritual aspect. And so we see in Celtic medicine, the thistles all have that spiritual aspect. And I'm pretty sure the kudzu flower has kind of a white into purple, almost a violet red color. And somebody who sees those more often than me, the herb that ate the South, feel free to add in. And so, without a doubt, it has a cooling aspect, which will be beneficial. There are some parallels to the black cohosh. I'm now intrigued, and I'm like, I can't say I've ever used those as a one-for-one. I would almost say, I bet you there's an interesting synergy between kudzu and shengma to use them together, and would do well with some of the other herbs that we oftentimes use in association with it. And now I'm really like, oh, I want to torture somebody because I almost want to mix it with Solomon's seal to add a little bit more moisture to it. And so Solomon's seal is also, of course, Chinese herb, huangjing, and is specific for tendons, dry tendons, contracted tendons, and wonderful moistening, doesn't taste too bad. And so it would be an interesting combination to try to relax, moisten, release using the Solomon seal, kudzu, and black cohosh together. I'm going to find somebody to torture with all of that. So the other thing I wanted to mention, I think that as women transition into menopause, I think it's important to recognize that there is a mental emotional aspect to that as well. That loss of their identity and self oftentimes, and so I think there's a real role in a lot of those herbs that help to protect or nourish the heart, and not the physical heart so much as that emotional, spiritual heart, where we look at sadness, love, anxiety, all of those kinds of things. So looking at rose, looking at, I would say, lady's mantle would fall into that. Anything in the rose family, honestly. What else am I trying to think of? Hawthorn, hawthorn berry in particular, because it's a little bit more moistening. And the hawthorn berry, I love the Chinese hawthorn berry for the spiritual heart, which is shanza. Sorry, trying to type all of those into the chat for y'all. And if there's actually some blood pressure issues and so forth, to start to add in the more Western flower and leaf of the hawthorn. And I pretty much use those interchangeably. I think of the Western herb as a little bit drier, the Chinese a little bit more moist. And then the other thing to think about is, as menopause starts to happen for a lot of women, they're trying to avoid doing estrogen. The docs do try to put the Premarin, the horse urine on the pregnant horse urine. Got to remember those horses are pregnant. Or even the bioidentical hormones. And those are technically natural, to include the Premarin, the horse urine. That is a natural product, and it is bioidentical. It's very similar to the human estrogen, but we do see some problems with it, and certainly preferable to do balancing of hormones. But I find that, except in the extreme cases where all else fails, that ends up being very expensive, and you end up chasing numbers. I don't think it's appropriate. Like, we're supposed to age, we're supposed to transition and take on different roles, and just cranking people full of testosterone and estrogen to make them 25 again isn't always of benefit. And I find for both men and women, there's a host of issues that pop up when we try to make them something they're not. And there are certainly good reasons when it is necessary, but I like to try a few other things before we go off on that. very expensive, customized without good depth of understanding, creation of hormones. So the vaginal dryness is a real issue. It's probably for women who are over 60, usually more often 70 and so forth, and still sexually active. Vaginal dryness or vaginal wall thinning is a huge issue. And usually what I recommend is cacao butter, cocoa butter. And you can get that, it's hard as a rock when you buy it, it should be. You can infuse other herbs into that that may help with nourishing the tissues. The nice thing, the reason I use that is you can make little vaginal inserts, and literally you could use this pen. You can buy molds and so forth. Whoops, boy, that's hard to get on camera. So that's about a little bit smaller than my finger. Bonus if it's tapered at one end. And literally you can just gently warm the cocoa butter, pour it into your molds, and you can do it, come to a medicine making class. You can take aluminum foil and literally form a mold like this, and you can make a dozen of them in 5 minutes, and then just crimp off the ends, pour in your herb infused cocoa butter, and harden it in the fridge. And probably this is my pinky, maybe just a half an inch of that is all you need. The nice thing about cocoa butter is it melts at body temperature. So once inserted into the vagina, it will melt slowly. It nourishes the tissue and provides a lubricant that is generally non-irritating, fairly safe. It's generally odorless, and it tastes like chocolate because that's where cacao butter or cocoa butter comes from. The only downside is it is not condom safe. So it is an oil that will break down a condom. So as long as you're with the same partner and there's no STDs to worry about, because you're menopausal, we're not worried about pregnancy, presumably. And anybody can use it at any age, but remembering that it is not condom safe. So that's really important about the cocoa butter. It's one of my favorite ways to, whether we're making suppositories for healing anal fissures or any other kind of issues, or any kind of vaginal dryness, tears, yeast infections, you name it, we can use the cocoa butter, and it's just so easy to work with and safe. I don't know, I think I talked enough about menopause stuff. There's a variety. I should talk about some of the other things that menopause stuff. Evening primrose oil is oftentimes talked about that. Yeah, sure. Nothing wrong with that. It is generally a healthy oil. I tend to find that almost any plant oil is effective. Evening primrose, and we have a Florida variety here that is more often used as an herb. Everybody forgets it's like just the oil. Oils, fish oil, plant oils can be very effective, and the trick is to get some therapeutic dosing with that. And so I usually start at 2 grams at least once a day, taken internally, and if you're vegetarian, I really like Udo's products. Oops, I spelled that funny, but that's spelled right. Udo's has a 369 that uses a variety of seed oils for vegans that really seems to help balance out our diets that tend to either be deficient in fats or difficult to break down fats because of gallbladder dysfunction, or we're eating too much of the yummy omega-6s, not enough of the 3s and 9s. So the Udo's 369 does a nice job from a plant-based idea, and any number of different fish oils will also serve a similar problem. And there's a easy test if you're not familiar with it, and it's of course a little controversial, everything in alternative medicine is. Checking the back of your arm, your tricep, If it's bumpy or rough, almost feels like you got acne on the back of your arm, you have an essential fatty acid deficiency or imbalance, and that can usually be corrected by fish oil or plant oils. What other ones are touted for menopause stuff? Those are the biggies. There's a number of products out there. Oh, I know what the other one is. Ginseng is oftentimes talked about. The Chinese oftentimes use ginseng as well, but I think it's important to understand there are different types of ginseng. There's American ginseng and Chinese ginseng. Korean ginseng is really the same as Chinese ginseng, but the Koreans say theirs is best and the Chinese say theirs is best. Doesn't matter. And then there's things that are called ginseng. There is Leutherococcus, which is Siberian ginseng, not a true ginseng. And then there's something called Prince Seng root or Taizi Shen, which is a Japanese ginseng, also not a true ginseng. And I would say that the one not to use is the Chinese ginseng. It is the warmer of the bunch. And Eleuthero, I would also steer people away from because it's dry. For me, I tend towards phlegmy and wet and cold. Eleuthero is my friend. So for menopause, because that tends to be a deficient and hot condition, we need cooling and nourishing. The Prince Seng root, known also as Taizi Shen, is excellent. It helps to moisten the lungs, the skin, but also nourish and cool everything else. The American ginseng is also cooler than Chinese. I find that's a better choice. And those are the biggies. And we talked about Shatavari earlier as well. And Shatavari is a great one in Ayurvedic medicine that's, again, cooling and moistening. I'm sure I'm forgetting. I usually go Chinese with my folks going through perimenopause or menopausal. And as long as we're talking about hormone and menstrual stuff, we got the question about hormones and endometriosis, menstrual irregularities, and PCOS. And I need a weekend, not 2 hours. No. Actually, even on a weekend, it's a little hard to cover any one of those, but I'll hit those a little bit. Oh, sorry. Need food and sleep. You're not boring me. So, without a doubt, it's funny. Western medicine has really not a lot of answers for menstrual stuff. Their approach is, here's birth control, or let's cut it all out. And I like to think we can do better than that. As a general rule, if they're testing hormones, it's completely useless information. If you are still menstruating, you still have your period, the best way to tell what your hormones are doing, because your hormones change constantly during your presumably normal average 28-day cycle. Every single moment of every day, those hormones change. And the way we look at it energetically through Chinese medicine is we're nourishing from the end of bleeding to ovulation, and then we start to move things around from ovulation to the start of bleeding. But the best thing that you can do is to do what's called BBT, basal body temperature. And there's apps for that. The secret to success with that is having a thermometer by the side of the bed. And it doesn't matter whether it's an oral thermometer or one you put on your forehead, as long as it's consistent the way you test it. It has to be before you even sit up in bed. Literally, you have a thermometer on the side of your bed, you open one eye, you stick the thermometer in your mouth. And there's some people say under the arm, forehead, I don't care, as long as it's the same way every time. And you can track that, and they have apps that will help track your entire cycle. And you can, if you're trying to figure out, if you're having problems with fertility, trying to get pregnant, trying to avoid getting pregnant, BBT is a really helpful way to do that because you can chart your follicle stimulating hormones, your luteinizing hormone, estrogen, progesterone through your entire cycle, and to see whether there's a dysregulation in the release of those things. And that can have a dramatic role in everything from irregular, painful PMS, PMDD, infertility, and I would argue even PCOS. And so let's talk about PCOS first. So polycystic ovarian syndrome is, I'm going to say I see it more than I did in the past, but probably just because I know what to look for. And there's kind of two types. And for any of you who are members of the American Herbalist Guild, I forget who did it. Somebody just in the last year did a wonderful free webinar for members on PCOS specifically, and really broke down that there's more than just the one type of PCOS that we see. There's some less traditional models of that with a lot of the same difficulties. And I was really impressed. I'm sorry I don't remember that person's name, but they did a great job. So we tend to see, and it still baffles me, infertility often comes with PCOS. A really lousy, painful menses usually comes with it. There's usually a slew of other disorders that accompany it because we see the hormones are out of whack, usually an elevated testosterone. So we see a heavier body frame. We tend to see more body and facial hair. And I think I said infertility. And all of those, and a slew of other, the depression becomes more common, head hair thinning tends to be an issue. One of the things that comes with the elevated testosterone is also a poor processing of the used up testosterone, the dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. So one of my go-tos for anybody dealing with PCOS is frequently to give them saw palmetto. That's so helpful, and we always think about that for male prostate, but really it's about helping processing that out. Our prostate for men, and women don't have that, is to help us process out that used up testosterone. So anything from saw palmetto to nettle root, Puerma, South American herb, all of those are really helpful with dealing with that DHT, or dihydrotestosterone. In Chinese medicine, there's a classic formula, gotta remember these things off the top of my head, Guizhi Fuling Tong. Tends to be a formula that I won't say we use with most cases of PCOS, but we'll oftentimes use that as a base and then create some other herbs around that, adding and subtracting based on their energetics. But that's a good starting place if you're showing that classic model of that heavier frame, extra body hair, thinning head hair, infertility, painful menses. It's a good choice. The other thing is, I forgot about that one. We have to watch for elevated blood sugar. There seems to be an overall inflammation that increases the risk of blood sugar issues with with PCOS. And prophylactically, the MDs will oftentimes give somebody, even at a very young age, metformin, which is a treatment for diabetes, just to prevent the inflammation of elevated blood sugar levels that can cause. An interesting thing, because infertility is so common, I'll write that one down, Maureen. Because infertility is such a common thing, all right, so much for spelling. a lot of times after trying for 2 or 3 years in where we normally think of the most fertile years in those early 20s, they just go, I'm infertile. The doctors tell them they're infertile. You've got PCOS. You'll never get pregnant. And what happens is they stop using protection and they just say, screw it, it's never going to happen. It is more common that in the late 20s, early 30s, that the hormones start to regulate a little bit to the point where you have better success with PCOS and getting pregnant in those late 20s, early 30s. And so, not to say don't try, if nothing else, it's fun trying. But it's super appropriate to don't hold your breath in those early years. Know that you're going to have greater success and make plans for getting a little bit more diligently in that later 20s and early 30s. And I would say too often I find the gynecologists, the GPs are not asking enough questions. When a woman comes to them either presenting with all those common characteristics like the excessive body hair, painful menses, or for whatever reason that they're presenting, I think it should be, they sit there and test progesterone and estrogen and never test testosterone in those early stages, because women who are dealing with PCOS oftentimes have higher libidos because of an elevated testosterone. And I don't want to say how many times I was like, tell your gynecologist that they need to shut up and test your testosterone. And they go, whatever. And they're surprised when they find an elevated testosterone. And it shocks me that that is a classic Western medical sign of potentially PCOS. And there's other issues with the PCOS, obviously not just fertility and painful menses. The name itself, PCOS, is polycystic ovarian syndrome. So the ovaries are oftentimes, I need my cool pictures to show you all. With PCOS, we tend to see almost a hard, phlegmy or waxy covering where when an egg is supposed to be released out of the ovary and picked up into the fallopian tube, that it's not being released properly, and so it's staying in there, and it can kind of get infected and will burst, and horribly painful pus and blood discharge. Women just assume that their appendix burst or something else, fever, nausea, vomiting, and appropriate to go to the hospital and get all the drugs. The goal, though, is to prevent some of that waxy covering so that there is an appropriate release of that egg. And thinking about it as a phlegm condition can oftentimes be helpful. There is one unique herb in Chinese medicine that is not talked about in Western, and I'm continuing to explore because it is used. It's mentioned in some traditional cultures and Native American cultures. The black locust tree, and it's hopefully I spelled this right. Zhao Jiao Zi Zi Zi. Yeah, I don't remember. I'm pretty close. Zhao Jiao Zi. It's either ZI or CI. I don't remember which. And this is actually the spines of a black locust tree. And there's one that grows here in Florida, and I forget whether it's the honey locust or the black locust, but one is commonly used, one less commonly used. So it's one for those of you who come from other traditions. I would say see if any of your teachers or elders are familiar with the use of locust tree for any number of different issues. But I won't say traditional use of the Zhaojiaozi is for cysts, but it's almost kind of a mixing of metaphors that we start to use that in Chinese. So let's talk endometriosis. Boy, I wish I could say endometriosis was easy to work with. I would take PCOS over endometriosis. So endometriosis is, where's my charts again when I need them? So in the uterus, every cycle, you build up an endometrial lining. So that's the blood starts to grow along the inside of the uterus through your cycle. And it's preparing for a fertilized egg to come in and implant there into the endometrial lining to make a baby. And if there is not a fertilized egg, then that lining sloughs off, and that's what we call a period or menses. So, and it's not well known why, but for some reason in some women, that those endometrial cells, these specialized cells that are being stimulated to engorge with blood, with hormones, start to form outside of the uterus, and over time form what's called chocolate cysts. But it's like those cells can show up anywhere in the abdominal cavity, from your diaphragm to your stomach to your intestines to the colon, to the bladder. And so every time that you have your period where you're getting menstrual cramps and discomfort in the uterus, you're also getting these cramps and pain in wherever those endometrial cells have camped out. So literally you can feel like you're being kicked in the rectum every time you have your cycle, because you've got a bunch of endometrial cells there. And without a doubt, Chinese medicine helps. I'm biased. I think the herbs help more than the acupuncture. The acupuncture can give some temporary relief. We see that as a type of blood stagnation, those purple chocolate cysts that you can find on, if they do abdominal surgery, to find those. Western medicine will do surgery to remove those. They'll wait until it gets so bad, then they'll go in and they'll find these pockets of dried blood, basically menstrual blood, in weird places throughout the abdomen. They remove those. The problem is it usually comes back, and it also creates scar tissue every time they have to go into the abdomen to remove those. And after a while they usually just say, just let's cut all your reproductive organs out. So I'm not a fan of that. I have seen success using herbs. It takes a while, usually a year or two, to get some real success with it. Diet has a huge impact. Any number of different herbs can have success with it. Any of your pain and invigorating herbs can help with it, as well as some of your hormonally based herbs. I tend to go Chinese on the endometriosis. I've had way better success with Chinese herbs than I have from Western. What's the formula that we use? I usually think about it. Is it Shufu or Shaofu? I think it's Shaofu. Whoops. Yeah, I typed both. Shaofu Zhu Tong. So this is the Zuyu Tong. I might be off on which formula. There's a bunch of Zuyu Tong formulas, and they're all for different parts of the body. So Shufu, Shaofu, Shenfu, or Shentong, all of those, it's for my students, that's where we learn how to manipulate any formula using guiding herbs to a different part of the body based on the scholar from 1,000 years ago who created these blood invigorating formulas throughout the body. So if you're a Chinese herbalist, look up the creator of the Zhuyu Tong formulas and get educated. And I always feel really bad saying this, here it is at 7 o'clock at night, and my now very watered down coffee. I'm quite sure that coffee does harm to guys, but I find that about half of the menstrual pain and PMS, the premenstrual syndrome, the irritability, depression, anger, or sadness that comes with the right before the menses, and to include endometriosis, 100% elimination of coffee can sometimes, I'm going to say half the time, fix the issue within 3 cycles. And literally, 1 cup of decaf, 1 cup of coffee. I don't care if it's organic, cold brew, yada, yada, yada. That sometimes has a dramatic impact, and I don't know why. So the fact that decaf will do it as much as fully caffeinated means it's not caffeine that's the issue. There's something unique about the herb coffee. It's certainly drying. It is invigorating, but outside of that, I'm not sure what it's doing in the body. You can also sometimes have success with magnesium, and I don't know how to spell serapeptase. I'm close with the serapeptase. The downside with serapeptase is this is a blood thinning herb. It can be used to prevent scar tissue, and in this case, the chocolate cysts. It can dramatically increase the menstrual bleeding. So if you already have a heavy period, or if you're just experimenting with serapeptase, you do need to be careful. You're going to have a much heavier cycle than you have in the past. It will oftentimes you'll move some clots and may have a temporary increase in cramps and pains associated with it. So I usually start with very low doses and work my way up with the serapeptase. Don't use it if you have hemorrhoids. Don't use it if you have any bleeding conditions or if you are on any kind of blood thinners, to include aspirin. It can be very serious outcomes if you do that. So don't use serapeptase if you're about to get surgery. So I would say there's a time and a place for surgery. Endometriosis can be debilitating. And it sometimes can be too debilitating to wait for menopause to come around. I would argue that let's try everything before we go to organ removal, and certainly reproductive organs. And it can be really challenging for somebody who wants children, and the doctors are saying your only hope is birth control or hysterectomy. And I think they're saying it less, but with endometriosis, sometimes they say, well, just pop out a kid, you'll be fine, that'll fix it. I have seen that happen as well. So sometimes we need a dramatic shift in our body, and having a child is a dramatic shift in every way that we can think of. All right, so we're an hour into this, and I am babbling incoherently, so I'm going to do a station identification. If you don't know, I'm Bob Lindy of Tradition School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies here in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida. We have both a multi-practitioner clinical practice with acupuncture and herbal interns here 3 nights a week. That is an inexpensive way to get treatment, and of course we have our full-time practitioners here 6 days a week, both acupuncture physicians and herbalists, as well as spiritual practitioners here. We've also got the herb school with Western and Chinese herbal studies from beginner all the way to practitioner, and one of the few schools in the nation that actually provides clinical practice for our senior herb students. And so we have a year-round ongoing intern clinic with our students both observing and practicing, as well as we provide an externship for, I guess, 3 acupuncture schools now, primarily from East West College in Sarasota, but we've also had interns from Dragon Rises in Gainesville, as well as I had a PhD student from Emperor's College, I think, out west. I won't swear to that. I'm pretty sure I'm right. Let me see. We had, I'm going to have a slight rant. So it's funny. One of my, and promise I'm going to get to ganglion cyst and one other question that I know I've got here. And feel free to, we're doing good. So we've got an hour left. And so if anybody else has any questions, I think I've covered all but the ganglion cyst here. And geographic tongue. Sorry, Maddie, I forgot about yours. So I really enjoy YouTube. As I'm getting ready in the morning, I'll frequently listen to lectures and watch videos. It's a really easy way to learn everything from very boring basic stuff to advanced stuff. There's like medical board reviews for MDs. There's physical exam for orthopedic surgeons to physical therapists. There's great lectures for practitioner acupuncture physicians as well as herbalists. Anything from really short little blurbs to really long ones that I find really helpful. So sometimes as I'm just going about getting myself ready in the morning, I'll listen to an hour-long lecture on some random medical subject, or I'm getting ready to teach a class. I'll brush up on some of my stuff. It's a great place to learn anatomy and physiology. For my students, I'm going to have to post some of those. And you know what? Sometimes I listen to fluffy stuff that is no socially redeeming value whatsoever. And one of those, if you've not run across him, is Dr. Mike. I actually like the guy. He actually talks, he's a Western MD, just a general practitioner, a good speaker, dynamic. He brings in guests. He's a little goofy and silly. I don't know anything about that. But he has taken a unique approach to kind of making fun of some of the alternative medicine stuff out there. And admittedly, I make fun of some of the alternative medicine stuff out there. And it's always interesting, and I think he's a very honest, he knows what he knows, and not a lot else. He's dedicated himself, and from what I could tell, he's a really good general practitioner who does a good job of trying to take a personal approach to all of his patients, and obviously works a lot of hours, and sometimes somehow still manages to have YouTube things going on a fairly regular basis. But he doesn't even know he's making fun of Chinese medicine, but he does it a lot. And he was just being goofy, and I know he doesn't know he was insulting, but he basically insults traditional medicine a lot. And with all that spare time, I'm going to actually email him, because I think he'll actually potentially respond to it. That he was looking at some, and admittedly I would make fun of this too, this little herbal patch that you put on your belly button, and to expel evil and evil heat and evil damp and so forth. The problem is he doesn't understand that that's a diagnostic description of unique diseases that's unique in every traditional culture that I've ever run into. And so whether it's the native people, the First Nations people of North or South America, the Chinese, Ayurvedic, and a lot of the European traditions all have this idea of evil wind in how it affects the body. And what did we do before we had germ and virus theory? And my running joke is, your mama told you not to go outside with a wet head, you'll catch a death of cold. And why do we even call it a cold? When we have a fever, we still call it a cold. It's because of these older traditions. And I think it's important that we can say that it's not supported by the FDA, that it's not a common Western medical practice, but I think it's important that we not make fun of traditional cultures. If we were to make fun of the religion, we would definitely take offense. If we make fun of any religion, we would take offense. And religion is older than modern science. And so in that same vein, I think it's important that we not allow other medical professionals to make jest of things they don't understand that are traditional belief systems as well as traditional medical practices. So I like me some Dr. Mike. I'm going to find some time in the not too near future to voice my disdain to his lack of understanding. And it's funny, I haven't done it because of COVID. I haven't been out to St. Pete College to teach for the nursing program out there, but they used to have they used to have me out there regularly for their class in dealing with different cultures and religions in nursing. There was a cool name for it, but because so many traditional cultures, as they come to the U.S. and they immigrate to the U.S., they hold on to those traditional practices, and frequently that involves herbal medicine, and they don't feel safe sharing their herbs or their supplements with their nurse or with their doctor because of the kind of commentary that their doctors make. And so if they don't feel safe and secure to talk about the other treatments they're doing, and whether that's scraping, the gua sha of Chinese medicine, whether that's doing herbs or soaks or baths, then they're not going to tell their doctors there might be an herb drug interaction, and that's a very real thing. So I think one of the leaps forward for Western medicine is not about doing more research in herbs. I don't care whether they do that or not. We know the stuff works. You wouldn't be here listening to me. But I think it's about respect and equality that is not too far down the pike. For those of you who are in the medical realm, here in the U.S., and actually I believe it's international codes, we recently, in the last, no, it's okay, it's probably been 5 years, we switched from ICD-9 to ICD-10. And so those are the medical codes, the diagnostic and treatment codes that people use that you get in your medical billing that is sent to your insurance company. So the entire world, and the U.S. is really taking a big lead in this, is now on the ICD-11. I think my numbers are right on this. ICD-11 is incorporating, like not may, it's going to incorporate a lot of alternative medicine to include Ayurvedic, Chinese, shamanistic practices, yoga, Tai Chi, all of those, and what comes with those are treatment modalities. They're going to throw the diagnosis codes in there. So like yin deficiency, qi stagnation, and so forth, that are going to be part of the diagnostic codes because we haven't actually been integrated into the medical system, at least in this country. We have a few countries that do integrate it, but without a coding system, there's zero tracking of what role do we have in this. And so if I think about all the people I've helped that have been failed by all of the MDs, all of the specialists, the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, they've all been sent home saying, sorry, we can't figure it out. And we take these very unique diagnostic approaches of qi stagnation and evil wind, and we create the right herbal protocols and lifestyle protocols and so forth, and they get better and their blood work changes. They just say, oh, stuff happens, we must have been wrong. They don't understand because they don't have a way to track it. So I look forward to probably 10 years from now, if we're lucky, where we will see this integration of alternative medicine and traditional medicine, even more importantly, into that coding and diagnostic system, the ICD-11 series. So acupuncture today has some really good information in the role that acupuncture and herbal medicine has in that, that you can find out more about, where traditional medicine, also through the World Health Organization, they have a lot of information about traditional medicine is how they refer to it rather than alternative medicine, and its role in the world's medical systems and the importance of both preserving it and recognizing its ability to help 2/3 of the world's population. And certainly for the last 20,000 years, it has been our primary form of medicine, where Western medicine's been kicking around for a good 100 years or so. So it's the new kid on the block, and a great one. I always say Western medicine is great for heroic medicine. They're kind of mediocre for long-term or chronic care, or preventative medicine for that matter. I don't want to forget yours, Maddie, the tongue diagnosis. So it's really funny, and I know not everybody here is Chinese medicine-y folks, so I want to talk about just the role of tongue diagnosis in medical care. And so for those of you who are closer to my age or older, your doctor, you stick out your tongue and say, was like part of your regular annual routine, a kid or an adult. And it wasn't reserved only for a sore throat or chronic illness. That was something that the doctors did as a matter of course. And the old school doctors were looking at a different set of descriptors of the tongue, and we have things like strawberry tongue. There's some cool names for it, But they were looking at the coding. They were looking at dots. They were looking at things like a geographic tongue and making medical conclusions for that. We find that in traditional culture around the world, the looking at either the top or the underside of the tongue is a major diagnostic tool of recognizing what's going on inside the body. And so Maddie asked specifically about the idea of a geographic tongue. And geographic tongue exists in both Western and Chinese medicine. And what it is you've got like normal or thick coating in some areas of the tongue and random odd shaped clear areas in the tongue. And in the realm of Chinese medicine, if somebody walks in to see us for the first time for a consultation as an herbalist, and they stick out their tongue, we're going, oh, that's a geographic, oh my God, excuse me, a geographic tongue. Obviously, I need to go to sleep. We don't actually know what that means. Really, what it tells us is that tongue is demonstrating there is a transition. And we don't know whether it's transitioning to a really thick tongue coating to a no coating. So we have to see which way it's transitioning. Where it lines up on the tongue, we have a mapping of the tongue. So if you look up tongue diagnosis, Chinese medicine, or tongue diagnosis, Ayurvedic medicine, you'll get some similarities. Other systems have it as well. Anani Tibbs, Celtic, Persian medicine all uses the tongue as a diagnostic tool, the Greeks. But you'll find more information probably on Greek or on Chinese and Ayurvedic. For me, though, I kind of modernize it a little bit. When I see a geographic tongue, the idea of gut dysbiosis, basically the good bacteria in our gut, is out of whack. It frequently is brought on by antibiotic or steroid use, oftentimes both. And something as simple as a Z-Pack, just 5 days of antibiotics and the same as steroids and anti-inflammatories can throw off a healthy gut system. And sometimes it lasts for a long time. We'll also see folks who will come in and saying, oh yeah, I've got a geographic tongue, I've had it my whole life. Usually they haven't. They've had it since they were a kid, and so they were frequently the kid back in the day with lots of antibiotic use, or preemie, where they had a compromised immune system and had a lot of immune systems over the years. And so they usually have a lot of gut repair and gut balancing that needs to take place in order to correct that. A geographic tongue I don't consider congenital or good. I think that's something that needs to be worked on and understood. Almost forgot that. Because of it's becoming a little less prevalent, but the overuse of cesarean sections also led to an increase of gut dysbiosis or just malabsorption and so forth, a not healthy gut biome. Because your initial inoculation of your good bacteria is passing through the vaginal canal of the mom. It's something a lot of folks, midwives and home birth, people who are doing a home birth, they'll frequently take probiotics in the month leading up to, even if they're doing great, just to make sure that they've got a healthy gut biome when that kid does pass through the vaginal canal. The other thing you'll get with the more progressive OBGYNs or the midwives is if they have to resort to a cesarean section for some reason, as the kid's removed from the womb, they'll actually do a swipe of the vaginal secretions and actually wipe that around the mouth of the newborn, just to create as close of approximation to that natural initial inoculation during that. Hopefully that answers your question, Maddie. I think that's all interesting stuff I got to say about geographic tongue. And tongue diagnosis as a whole, for any of you who are going to see an herbalist or an acupuncturist or Ayurvedic practitioner, I'm going to say nothing wrong with brushing your tongue, but don't do it the day that you go in. Ideally, try to avoid colored drinks before you go, like the beet smoothie or the blueberry smoothie may fool them. Coffee or tea might fool us a little bit on the tongue diagnosis as well. It was interesting. We had a Shuar woman come from Ecuador who, for the Shuar, at least for her as a practitioner, they looked at the underside of the tongue and made their diagnostics from that. They thought that the surface of the tongue was too unpredictable. And so the Chinese, we primarily use the top of the tongue, I think in Ayurvedic as well. I think we had a question on the ganglion cysts. Man, ganglion cysts suck. I don't have. I'm sure if I scratched my head long enough, I could come up with why ganglion cysts happen. As a general rule, I'm gonna. Boy, it's all Chinese all the time here tonight. I'm gonna say that because of its nerve relationship, the ganglion being a nerve, that we see probably a role of the energetic liver. Although depending on where the cyst shows up, it's usually in the toes, sometimes in the hands. We might add another energetic organ into the mix. And the cyst aspect, it's a harder lump, that there's an aspect of phlegm involved. So we can look at things that cause the energy to get stuck, stress leading the parade on that, but also trauma can create a stagnation of qi or blood. So some sort of damage or trauma, I should say, in the area of the nerve, or because we're talking hands and feet mostly, it does happen in other places. There's sometimes a misalignment that's causing like friction near the nerve, and so ensuring that all of the pieces are back where they belong, that can be created through acupuncture, massage, chiropractic, physical therapy, any of those to create a physical as well as energetic balance to that. I generally approach ganglion cysts topically, and almost always I'll use castor oil as the base for either a salve or an oil or a plaster. And literally just kind of depends where it is, who the person is, how willing they are to make messes. My preference is usually a plaster or an oil. Salves are great, they're easy to work with, but they tend to dilute the product down too much because we have to thin it with some beeswax in order to get that consistency that we want. So we're taking, we're almost cutting it, the concentration down by 25% or more sometimes by adding beeswax. And beeswax is good stuff, but not necessarily going to be as effective to breaking up a hardness. So castor oil is hard to infuse herbs into, so I tend to use it as a wetting agent or sometimes even by itself. Castor oil is thought to break things up. Oh my God, I can't think of the guy's name. Does the castor oil packs and the flannel, Edgar Casey, there we go. I knew his head was in there somewhere. Talks a lot about using castor oil for breaking up stuff and also pulling things out of the body. So I love castor oil for that. I usually don't go to the extreme of the castor oil packs, the flannel and all that. That's great if you've got time for all of that. I tend to tell people just rub it on as frequently as possible. And if I'm able to grind up herbs into a powder and apply them topically using the castor as a wetting agent, or cooking those herbs into the castor oil in some form, infusing them into the castor oil. Sometimes I'll infuse it into a lighter oil, like grapeseed oil, and then mixing that in with castor oil. The herbs I tend to use for ganglion cysts, because of it is a nerve, St. John's wort is my number one choice. It wouldn't be wrong. You can buy olive oil or sunflower oil already infused with St. John's wort. It should be red in color. It's not wrong to use that by itself, or cut it with the castor oil. I'll oftentimes mix a little east and west with all of this. So the St. John's wort oil, I'll sometimes use black cohosh. I'll use the Zhaojiaozi, in the same reason that we use that locus on ovarian cysts. This is just good stuff for cysts. I'll use not cat's claw. I'll use chaparral, a southwest desert herb. It always needs to have an aromatic in there with it, something to help drive it into the skin. I really like tufuling, sarsaparilla, and there are a number of plants called sarsaparilla. The Caribbean sarsaparilla, which is the Smilax medica. Here in Florida, we have the greenbrier smilax. The root of that can be used interchangeably. Yeah. Cleavers. Cleavers should definitely be in there. And in the extreme, if I need to, and it's not a big deal to do it topically, poke, Phytolacta americana, Shenglu in Chinese. So we have to think about that phlegm, the hardness, and the nerve, and kind of putting that idea together. And I would say 99.9% of the time I just do it topically. Look at the physical structure away from where the ganglion cyst is. And it usually will reduce and break up over the space of a couple of months. And you should see progress after a month of applying either the oil or the poultice at least once a day. Perfect world, it would be twice a day, but that's not always practical. Internally, you would use more gentle approaches and just kind of look at the overall imbalances in the body. But usually the Western concept of phlegm, or excuse me, the Chinese concept of phlegm, or the Western concept of lymphatics. Both of those are super appropriate. The chickweed cleavers internally would be super appropriate. St. John's wort I do not use internally if someone is on any prescription, and for that matter, long-term over-the-counter medications. Unfortunately, I now we've had a student friend who has twins because of birth control and St. John's wort being taken together. So I pretty much assume St. John's wort interferes with everything. It's safer to think that way. You can get down to the P450, CY, blah, 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 whatever. I don't have time to look up what the mechanism pathway for every single medication is. I find it easier to just keep St. John's wort externally where it's safe, and internally only when it's specific necessary and there are zero medications involved, over the counter or prescription. Hopefully that helped with the ganglion cysts. I forget who asked that, and I ranted about that. I got all those. Lots of cool classes coming up. All right, we said all of that stuff. So the last thing I'm going to kind of talk about, a half an hour, a piece of cake. This time of year, I hope everybody, ate to excess, if we ignore the massacre of the indigenous people of the Americas and the Caribbean, in its relationship to European expansion into the Americas, Thanksgiving's that one time of the year that family and friends get together and share a meal. We don't do cards, we don't do gifts. So really it is, I try to ignore its historical past and roots and think of it as a holiday of sharing in our fall harvest, and recognizing and giving thanks for our plentifulness, and most importantly our friends and family. And that said, the tendency is that we eat eat and drink things to excess, and depending on your particular practices as we approach the winter solstice and the new year, we tend to see that around the Judeo-Christian holidays of Christmas and Hanukkah. And then the new year usually has its own extra yummy foods and overindulgences as well. And so, because our next one will be, I don't know, whatever the last Friday in December will be, I thought I'd go ahead and take this minute to talk about the role of food in our health. And it's always funny, we set New Year's resolutions, and those last hopefully until the following year or become lifelong practices. But it oftentimes revolves around food, it revolves around exercise and thought and behavior and so forth. And I think that's great. Nothing wrong with setting those New Year's resolutions, whatever they would be, because we need to, it's helpful to find a place and time to create change. And since there's oftentimes vacation, travel, time off that allows us an opportunity to create new behaviors, it is a good time to do that. And I always say those goals should always look at being reasonable, measurable, and achievable. And so, if I want to run a marathon before February, that may not be reasonable since I'm not running right now. Although I did twice now. So that may not be achievable. To be able to comfortably run 2 miles by February might be an achievable and measurable goal, that I can do that 3 days a week without pain, injury, or discomfort. That would be a reasonable goal. If we wanted to change our portion sizes or increase our vegetables, we could look at specific things with all of that. But there's a couple of aspects of the food that I always like to talk about. This is the winter time. Even here in Florida, it's not the real winter time, but it's our winter. It is a time when it is colder, especially in the evening, when we oftentimes eat to excess. And it is a time traditionally when we don't eat a lot of fruit, and we don't eat a lot of raw foods, both raw fruit and, like watermelon is something we eat in the summertime to cool off as we're out playing in those long, hot days. Watermelon in December, January doesn't seem as comfortable, and certainly for any of you who are up north where it's like for real cold, it's definitely watermelon in the wintertime, if you're out sitting outside in the snow, would seem insane. So looking at soups and stews, things that are root vegetables, that are complex carbohydrates at this time of year is generally considered that healthier eating. The other thing, and nope, I'm sorry, it is our tradition, at least over the last 100 years, that we overindulge in this time. And there's ways to do that with less harm. There's always some harm. Got to go watch the football game and undo the top button because their bellies are overfull. I would say starting your meal with a bitter vegetable can be helpful. If you know what a digestive bitter is, Swedish bitters you can find at a health food store, and there's many. Urban Moonshine makes some wonderful bitters, either warm or cold. Is a great way to start your meal and prepare your digestion, especially if you're going to indulge in yummy fatty foods. That will help stimulate the bile secretions to better adapt to the too much ofness of things. As I said, cooked foods is very helpful. Minimizing any cold iced drinks. Iced tea, ice water is not your friend this time of year, and especially on a time when we're going to overfill the belly. It will dilute your hydrochloric acid in your stomach. We say it'll put out your Agni, your digestive fire in Ayurvedic medicine, or your stomach chi in Chinese herbal medicine. So sipping warm drinks, red wine versus white wine, since we tend to chill our white wines, and again, minimizing our pre-dinner snacks, and making for smaller portion sizes. I always think about my meals when I'm doing something like Thanksgiving dinner. I have a tendency, I am somebody who is a glutton when it comes to food, to my detriment. But I want to taste everything. And so a little bit of everything fills the plate, and recognizing that certain foods are not my friend. So those highly refined foods, or those things that are high in dairy or sugar, I tend to take the smallest portion of, and looking at those other things, like, do put vegetables on there. I always look for something bitter to add to my plate. And small portions of each one of those can give us all the pleasures and gluttony that we expect in our meal times, but to minimize our exposure to too many of the wrong things. It is, even if you have perfect digestion, I would say for those days of overindulgence that may also include the leftovers for the next 3 days, digestive bitters is your friend. If you are a glutton like I am and overfill your plate more than once in any given holiday meal, it's not wrong to do either digestive enzymes and or hydrochloric acid, HCl pills. Your stomach, no matter how awesome your digestion is, cannot handle the volume of food that we stuff in there. There's also some classic Chinese formulas, the curing pills, also known as Ganglion, and a variation from more southern China, the Po Chai pills. These are all pretty much similar. For anybody who has celiac disease, these do sometimes contain trace amounts of gluten, so make sure that you know all of the herbs are in there, and make sure that there's no gluten-containing things in there. In particular, Shen Chu is a common herb, and that's medicated leaven is the translation, will contain gluten. So for most folks who are like, oh, I'm a little sensitive to gluten, you'll be fine. But if you identify as having celiac disease, you might not want to try these, and you might look at something else. Talked about digestive bitters. We said Swedish bitters, urban moonshine. Also, yay, COVID, travel, illness. We always see a spike in colds and flu. If you're traveling, if you're camping, traveling overseas, cruise ships, all very common this time of year. Watching out for food poisoning and Hoshang Shenqi Tong. Hoshang Shenqi Tong is patchouli pills. Yes, the hippie herb. Hoshang is patchouli in Chinese. This is great for the stomach bug that seems to be going around, making the rounds in way too many of my friends and patients right now. This is the go-to for that stomach bug. Or if you get food poisoning because you ran out of ice in your camping trip, but you ate the sushi from 3 days ago anyway, you usually need antibiotics or an IV to actually stop the vomiting and diarrhea. But for that lingering just yuck that can last for weeks, you can also use the patchouli pills, the Hoshang Shenqi Tong. Those are the biggies. For just Some of you have heard me talk about, it's known as yin chow, uh, also known as, oops, yin chow, and its proper name is yin chow Jade and I prefer the tablets, which is Pian. This is for that early stage colder flu, wind heat invasion in Chinese. I actually, almost had to stop traveling at some point because every time I got to the airport, my immune system was compromised. I would get sick every single time I traveled. Trying to go to an herb conference and flying was just terrible for me. And so I figured out that literally sucking on the yin chow is a lozenge. When I first got to the airport, when I got on the airplane, if I was going to if you were going to Europe or South America where it was more than just a 2 or 3 hour flight, I would actually do more than one of these and literally just suck on it. You get used to the bitter. It's got lots of antimicrobial herbs and so forth in there. And then one after I got out of the airport. And all of a sudden, I stopped getting sick every time I flew. So if you count yourself in that realm, you may want to get these, and they're pretty easy to find. We of course carry them here, but most acupuncturists carry yin chow. Asian markets, you can find this pretty easily, and I'm sure you can find it online as well. I personally prefer Mayway brand plum flower for the lozenge-like effect because they're just a compressed herb. But you can find it as a pill that you swallow by any number of other companies, Golden Flower and so forth. They're all fine. A couple of other ones out there. Some people will also use Yuping Feng San. This is also known as Jade Windscreen, which is kind of if you have, every time you sit under an AC vent, you start sneezing or your eyes start watering, if you're always kind of feel assaulted by a cold breeze, this might be your friend. And it's generally considered very safe. It's funny, the Airborne, which is, a common thing that people will use specifically for flying, is kind of a combination of yin chow with Yuping Fen Song, with a little vitamin C and other multivitamins tossed into it. And actually, nothing wrong with Airborne. It's got a few fillers, binders, and lubricants that I'm not a fan of. The other thing I was going to say, alcohol is not your friend. It is poison. We use that to sterilize the skin before we get a shot, and so we drink it. Hopefully not isopropyl, but the lovely fermented beverages that we've been known as a culture to indulge in for millennia. Certainly, drinking to excess has issues. I have a running joke. I've worked with a number of people who either have actual issues, alcoholism and so forth, or just occasionally overindulge. So I always say if you're going to have, whether it be a mixed drink or alcohol, wine or beer, doesn't matter, be a two-fisted drinker. One of your alcohol, one of water. And so if you take a swig of wine or beer or alcohol, make sure your next swallow is of water. And one of the problems that we see, part of the hangover, is dehydration. And so really it is an issue of getting dehydrated. So that makes you consume a little bit less, but still allows you the social lubricant of the alcohol. The other thing is, my students know this secret. Shh, don't tell anybody. Milk thistle is very protective of the liver. And so using milk thistle, whether it be as a capsule or eating some thistle of some sort, is fine. But the milk thistle capsules are convenient, along with a B complex. And if you're able to do the curing pills, doing those before you go out for your evening of fun and overindulgence, and then doing all of those. Oh, and I forgot vitamin C. Sorry, vitamin C, B complex, milk thistle, and curing pills before you go out, and then whenever you're done for the evening, you will minimize the damage that you do to your body. And with the B complex, it'll kind of help you have the energy through the day. And there's plenty of variation with all of that, but I really think of that milk thistle and vitamin C is really helpful in the whole process of all of that. Ensuring that we're getting properly hydrated through the whole process, trying to drink a whole lot before or after. I would say no, drinking continually through the time is preferable. Obviously, don't drink and drive. It has a designated driver. But in the same sense, I recognize, and for me, who as an introvert, I am very challenged by holiday festivities. And so we do find a need for some of us for that social lubricant, whether it's family or people we don't socialize with or large gatherings that sometimes happen. So starting to consider some of the other social lubricants that don't quite have the same damage. Kava being my favorite, and please don't mix alcohol in kava. So doing shells of kava and doing a beer or wine is a bad combination. They both affect the liver, and there's not a lot of good research, but as a general rule of people who do that, fine to do both, but do them on different days. Also, if you're drinking, don't do NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, specifically the acetylphenamine, the Tylenol, but there's some hints that even some of the other ones like ibuprofen and so forth may have some issues. It's not uncommon. It's like, yep, going to throw back a couple of Tylenol whilst I'm throwing back a shot. Really has bad outcomes for your liver and your microbiome for that matter. So kava is a wonderful social lubricant, doesn't have the hangover. You should still use caution operating heavy machinery if you're doing a bit of overindulgence. If cannabis is legal, cannabis, that's marijuana for those of you who don't recognize the Latin name, is a better choice also. That works as a nice social lubricant, and it doesn't have to be smoked. It can be ingested, but making sure that you do it again safely and having somebody else drive. And for some people, kratom is good. Like, I find kratom very helpful for me as a social lubricant, where other people maybe not so much. If you haven't used kratom before, make sure you find out a little bit. We've got a bunch of good videos on that stuff. And then you can even use some herbal teas for that kind of thing as well. Passion flower, passion leaf usually, is really helpful. It's great for that circular thinking. Things like skullcap, vervain, and even our Florida native. So we have the right kind of passion flower that grows here. Passion fruit also can work very nicely as a social lubricant pre or post big dinner party parfaits. The yummy sweet and sour of passion fruit is wonderful and a mild anti-anxiety. What other ones do I like? Skullcap's one of the favorites. Vervain is nice. And the Stachys floridata, the Florida betony or rattlesnake root, all of that can be used as a very mild anti-anxiety. Or if you have an adrenal formula for that stress, adrenal burnout, those can be helpful. So we have things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, reishi mushroom, and any of the other stuff I said can all end up in there. If you haven't used it before, make sure you're getting one that's correct for you. Those herbs, the rhodiola, you have to be careful of as a single. It is very, very dry. And ashwagandha is a nightshade. So for folks who are sensitive to nightshades, you need to be careful of taking that. I'm finding more and more people reactive to the root of the ashwagandha, even though technically it's not supposed to cause that issue. It has definitely caused that issue for some folks. And the other thing I'll add to that, and this is for myself and for literally millions of other folks out there, on New Year's Eve, I know it's so classic to blow up lots of stuff. For pets, certainly that is a major issue. Animals are always challenged by the explosiveness of fireworks. And as a veteran, I'm here to tell you, I don't go out on New Year's Eve. I leave work early, and I go inside and turn up the radio or the TV, or both, and use something to medicate with, because fireworks are really challenging for veterans. And not everybody's affected by it, and some play it off, or some just get really wasted in order to adapt to it. So please be cognizant of your fireworks and fireworks use, and your neighbors and your own animals and your neighbors' pets when it comes to all of that. It can be very challenging. And in the same sense, using things like the adrenal formula for me is almost a must on New Year's Eve, 4th of July, things like that. That I'll pop an extra one or two of those as the evening comes on, and take another one or two as the night progresses, and close the windows and yada yada yada. So I may just end a few minutes early this evening if nobody has any other questions. Obviously we've babbled about a few quite a few things. Oh, you know what? And sorry, as I'm talking and thinking and trying to read all simultaneously, an herb I did not mention, and I meant to, is fenugreek. It's called hulu ba in Chinese. This really comes from Persian and Ani Tibbs, Greek medicine primarily. We were talking about menopause earlier and hormone balancing. This is an overlooked herb, and it has a variety of uses. It's a warm but moistening and nourishing. It produces breast milk. It's carminative and it helps with your digestion, and it raises testosterone. It's I think one of the most overlooked herbs out there for hormone stuff, for intentionally that vague. So taking a look at that one for a variety of issues, but recognize it, and I think I spelt it wrong too, but you guys know what I mean. So I appreciate everybody coming out. I hopefully will have backup, and I won't wait until the night before on a holiday evening. Whatever our last Friday in December, and hopefully I will get off my butt in the next day or so and make an event for December. Please, 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 I love the questions. If you send them in ahead of time, it lets me scratch my head and think about it a little bit. So feel free to email us at traditionsherbschool@gmail.com. Feel free to post it in the questions on the event. Or any old which way that you want to. Hey, Tabitha, I didn't know you were out there. Any way you want to send us questions, I'm super happy to always talk about them. And we really obviously, the depth and breadth of questions, embarrassing ones, I won't mention your name if it's something very personal. It makes it so much more fun, and whether it be acupuncture, herbal, Western, Chinese, I'm happy to do my very best to delve into it. Find out about all the cool stuff we have going on at traditionsherbschool.com or acuherbals.com. I hope we see you at Shopapalooza if you're in the area. It's supposed to be the largest 300 vendors, small stores, stuff. It looked like total bedlam down there setting up this evening before this. And we've got a ton of classes coming up. So I hope I see you in a class online or at one of our cool events. And you all have a happy recovery from your Turkey Day. And I hope you have wonderful holidays and some time off visiting with friends and family in the new year. Good night, all. And if you miss it, don't forget to check us out on YouTube and subscribe. Bye.